This is Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Chof Gimel, the learning for this month. The month of Elul has been generously sponsored as an incredible schos. Aliyas Neshama of Esther Ezel Basar Ameir B'siyata Deshmaya. Every word of Torah should elevate the Neshama of Esther Ezel Basar Ameir higher in Gan Eden Shel Maila. We pick it up from Chav Beis Mebeis. We're about 10 lines from the bottom. First word of line is Amarav Ashi. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, continuing our discussion of the kinyan of an Eved Kenani. Ketzad b'chazaka. How do you make a chazaka on an Eved Kenani? Says the Gemara, Hitter loy min aloi. He unties your shoe, or hilach kelev achrav the Beis HaMerchatz, or he carries your kelim after you to the bathhouse. If shita, he undresses, or chita, he washes, sacha, he anoints, gardo, he rinses the skin, elbisha, he dresses, and ilu, he puts on a shoe, higbia, he picks you up, kanoi. All of these items, all of these done by the slave to the master, effects an acquisition, a chazaka, an act of ownership by the master on the Eved. Continues the Raisa Amar Rav Shimon loite chazaka gedayla mehagba. Says Rav Shimon, the act of chazaka should not be greater than hagba, than lifting. Shehagba, that lifting an item, koine bechol makayim, acquires everywhere. Now this last line of Rav Shimon is a little enigmatic, and the Gemara is now going to delve into that, which will thereby round up this entire entity of chazaka and how it works. Maika Amar, what is Rav Shimon adding in? Amar Rav Ashi, teaches Rav Ashi, Higbiyoi, hu liraboi, if he, the master, picks up the master, kanoi, then the master acquires him. Higbiyoi rabbi loi, if the master picks him up, loi kanoi, then the master does not acquire him. That's what the Tanakama held. And on top of that, Amar Rav Shimon teaches Rav Shimon, loite chazaka gedela mehagba. Chazaka should be no greater than hagba. Shehagba kaina b'chol mak. That hagba is a kinyan always. So now the Gemara says, what's Rav Shimon adding? Now that you told me when he picks up the master, there is a kinyan. If that is true, that the act of lifting up by the Eved to the master effects a kinyan by the master, asks the Gemara, Takana bibia. You know what Rav Shimon is asking? That a shivcha kenainis should be acquired through an act of bia. If the master sleeps with his shivcha, in a way he's lifting her up through the act of bia, and therefore he should acquire. Says the Gemara, theoretically you're right, but there's a fundamental problem. Ki kamrina, when do we say there's an act of chazaka, an act of acquisition via hagba? Zenene v'zemitztayer is only when, excuse me, I said it wrong. Shivcha kenainis should be takana bebiyah, because the shivcha kenainis is considered lifting up the master. Answers the Gemara, no. When do we say that it's an act of kinyan? Zenene v'zemitztayer, when the Eved is lifting v'zemitztayer, meaning the master gets hana, he's being lifted up, and the Eved is bitzar, that he's doing the lifting. But also over here, in the case of Shivcha Kenanis, an act of Bia, Zenan, Zenanu, then they're both having Hana, therefore that's why there is no kinyan effected. Ask the Gemara, what about if the Bia was on the back, which we know is a case which she, the woman, does not get Hana. Man leimalan, who told you the lavana islahu? Who told that there's no hana such a litervayu? Who told you not? Number one, maybe there is some level of hana by the woman. Number two, v'oid mishkavei isha ksiv. The pasuk is mishkavei isha, and from that pasuk, we learn out. Apologies that our Gemara just disappeared. Let's try that again. From that pasuk, what do we learn out? Tikishan hakosov. We are 3 lines to the bottom on Chav Beis and Beis. Hekeshet Akasav Kedarka Shloi Kedarka. The Torah equates the two of them, and therefore that's the reason why a woman, a Shivcha Kenainis, is not Koina herself through an act of Bia. Why? Because it's considered an act in which she does not get Hano. And we continue with a story, Rav Yehuda Handuya. Rav Yehuda from Hindu, Ger She'ein Lo Yarshin Avai. Rav Yehuda Handu was a Ger that didn't have any Yarshim, as most Gerim do not. Have Cholish, and he was sick. Rav Marzitcha came to visit him. Chazi took off Alma, and he saw that Rav Yehuda Handuya was about to be nifter. So Tagvle Alma Tuva. So Amar Leila Avde. So Rav Marzitcha says to the Eved, the servant of Rav Yehuda Handuya, Shalafli Misan, I pick off mine Marzitcha's shoe. Vantenu lebesi, carry it to my house. And Marzitcha thereby effects an kinyan on the Aved as the slave does an act of Avdos for Marzitcha. So now when Rav Yehuda Handuya is nifter, the slave segues directly into the rishus of Marzitcha. Ikadi Amri, some explain that you know what the story was? Gadol Have. Some explain that Rav Yehuda Handuya, that the slave was an Eved, and therefore, because the slave was an Eved, Zeh Birish L'Misa, V'Zeh Birish L'Chaim, and therefore, at the moment that Rav Yehuda Handuya is going to be nifter, what's going to happen is, the Rashi is in the bottom of Amud Beis over here, at that moment, the Eved is going to acquire itself, and that's the reason why Marzitcha felt that he has to, that simultaneously, the moment that the Rav Yehuda Handuya is going to die, this Eved's a gadol. So theoretically, he's going to acquire himself. So what happened? Marzitcha wanted at that moment to be making a kinyan on the Eved, and therefore simultaneously, the Eved will not have a moment. He'll go directly into the possession of Marzitcha. And the Gemara continues on the tab of Chav Gimel and Aleph. So the first lashon held that we are dealing with a gadol. The Eved was a gadol, and therefore the reason why Marzitcha was so intent on the kinyan happening simultaneously with the death was because if not, the Eved would be acquiring himself. Vika Diamri continues the Gemara on the top of Chav Gimel and Aleph. Katan haya. No, the Eved was really a katan. Udeloi ka'aba shol. And this is not like Abba Shal. What's Abba Shal? The Tanya we learned in a brayso. Ger shemeis ubizvizu Yisrael nechasav. A ger that dies. Again, top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. 3 lines down. Teaches the brayso. A ger that dies and Yisrael takes possession of his properties. And within the properties of a ger ben avodim, and the ger has slaves, being gedolim, being kitanim, kanu ben atzvan b'nei chayrin. Whether the avodim or gedolim or not, the halacha says this brayso is they go free. But Abba Shal Omer, no. Gedolim, if the Eved is a gadol, then kanu atzvan b'nei chayrin. Then the Eved indeed goes free. But ketanim, kol hamachzik bahen zacha bahem. The katan, whoever is going to be koina in them, will acquire them. Therefore, we're saying that Marzitcha did not hold like Abba Shal. Because if Marzitcha held like Abba Shal, it would be no big deal to be making a kinyan at the moment of the death of Rav Yehuda Handuya, because a katan goes to whoever is a machzik bahem. Therefore, proves the Gemara that Marzitcha held not like Abba Shal. And we continue 6 lines down. Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Ve'koina es atzmai bekesef. Says the Gemara that the Eved Kenaini could acquire himself with kesef, and then continue the Mishnah that the document, the shtar, is given to the Eved, but the kesef has to be kesef al yedei acherim, according to Rebbe Meir. Says the Gemara, bekesef al yedei acherim, in clearly what does Rebbe Meir hold, that the kesef has to belong to someone else? Avoloi al yedei atzmoi. But the kesef cannot belong to the Eved himself. Says the Gemara, again, the kesef that the Eved is being redeemed, being paid out with. B'mai askinon, what are we talking about? Ilay mashalai midaitoi. If the case is that shaloi midaitoi, if the case is that the Eved does not know that he's being freed, Mechdi, let's see. Shamina le the Rameir, what does Rameir hold? The Amar, Chayvu levet shatim yad rabbi lecheiros. Machlekes that we had in Gittin, whether at the beginning of Gittin, whether it's considered a chayv, whether it's considered a detriment or a positive entity to leave the master's possession and go free. And Rameir held no, it's a chayv, and Eved rather stay in his avdos. He's taken care of. So chayvu levi yotzed rabbi lecheiros utanina, and as well we learned in the Mishnah, zachana adam shalai b'fanav. If something's a schos, that I could acquire something for you. I don't have to tell you that I'm making a kid $1 million to you. But ve'ein chavin loy ela b'fanav. Something is a detriment to you, a chav, then it only could be done b'fanav, in front of you. So says the Gemara, if what we just said is true, that the Eved does not know about it, it would not work with kesef al yedei acherin, because ein chavin la'adam ela b'fanav. Therefore, we wouldn't be able to pay out the Eved unless it's in front of him. Ela pshita, what must the case be? Midaitoi. The case must be that the Eved knows he's getting freed. The money is belonging to someone else. And what would that chiddush teach us? A sidebar din, says the Gemara. Alma, you know what that teaches us? Ein kinyin la'eved b'loi rabbi. That whatever the Eved owns automatically is considered owned by the master. Similar to any item that an Isha owns is considered being owned by her husband. Similarly, any item that an Eved is owned by his master. And that's the reason why it has to be paid out from someone else, because essentially the Eved has no money. Asks the Gemara if that's true. The Seifa says that the shtar he accepts himself. The obvious implication is someone else can't accept the shtar for him, but asks the Gemara 1 second, if he knows about it, why can't someone else make a kinyan on the shtar for him? If he's happy about it, then certainly they could act as his shaliach to accept the shtar for him. Maybe you're going to suggest, says the Gemara further, so what does it mean? Via himself, af al yedei atzmai, that it even works on himself, but also with someone else. V'kamash malan, and then this would teach us the gita v'yadai bayim ke'echad, teaches a different novelty. This Eved is going free. So if you think about it, if he's going free, how could he be the one to accept the shtar? It's a funny fake, because the moment he accepts the shtar, he's no longer an Eved. So you know what the chiddush would be? The chiddush would be gitoi v'yadai bayim ke'echad. That simultaneously, at that precise moment, he acquires the get and he becomes a free man. That would be the chiddush of the Mishnah. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? This can't be, because we already taught in a brisa the Tanya, the brisa already taught such a din. So Amar Abaye, so we're trying to figure out what is the case of the Mishnah. Does this Eved know he's being redeemed or not? Amar Abaye explains Abaye lo'ilam. Really, we're talking about shaloi midaitai. Really, we're talking about that the Eved does not know he's being freed. V'shayni kesef. So why in the case of money it has to be paid with someone else's money? Hoyel v'kanile bal karchei, maknile bal karchei achedish. Since you could acquire an Eved against his will, you could free the Eved against his will. Says the Gemara, okay, beautiful, but Yachi Shtar Nami, Star should have the same din. And on that says the Gemara, no, why should they have the same din? Hai Shtar Lachod, Hai Shtar Lachod, the two different dinim. Continues the Gemara, Chanami, what do you mean? If you're going to say and split up, then Hai Kaz Lachod, Hai Kaz Lachod. Says the Gemara, money by its very definition can't be split up. Teva mi'achadu, it's the same coin, and therefore that's how the Gemara is going to differentiate between the din in the Mishnah of Kesef al yedei acherim and via the din of Shtar al yedei atzmai. Rav Amar Kesef Kabbalah Rabbi Garmas loy, shtar kabbalas achirim garma loy. Says Rava, a different yesod, that when it comes to the money, it's the master accepting the money that causes the freedom, whereas when it comes to the shtar, it's someone else accepting the money, and therefore that's the reason why it has to have his consent. It has to be midaita. And that is Shitas Rameir in the Mishnah. And with that, we segue into the next part of the Mishnah. About 20 lines to the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, the two dots. V'chachamim oimrim b'kesef al yedei atzmai. Say the Chachamim that when he acquires himself back, the Chachamim argue on Rameir, and they hold it's kesef al yedei atzmai. They hold that the money is given by himself. Says the Gemara because of the the similar discussion that we just had in Rameir, we're now going to have in the Chachamim. Amai, what's the reason? Very good, I understand that that you can't free the Eved without his das. What do you mean? The Rabbanan are the flip side of the whole previous discussion. The whole previous discussion in Rameir was all predicated on the fact that you're only able to cause a chav because the Rameir held that it's a chav, it's a detriment to be freed. But the Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim hold that it's a schos to leave. Utaninan, of course, if you're going to suggest what does it mean by himself? The flip side, that Eved does have an acquisition without his master. Then go to the Seifa, Ima Seifa. Maybe you're going to suggest, what does it mean by someone else? If that was true, the Mishnah should mix the two cases together and list as follows: in both of them, Ella. For the fact that the Mishnah did not do that, it's clearly the Mishnah did not hold that. So we're trying to figure out what is the case in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Ella, we have to say, B'kesef when it comes to money, Ben Aidei Acherim and Aidei Atzmai, Bishtar, Aidei Acherim, V'loi Al Yedei Atzmai, V'Rav Shimon ben Elazar, and we're going with the Shita of Rav Shimon ben Elazar that holds that when it comes to the shtar, it has to be Al Yedei Acherim and not on his own. Titanya, as we learned in the Braisa, 5 lines to the bottom. And now it comes out, we have a hidden third shita in the Mishnah. These are always the fascinating points of Gemaras, even though in the Mishnah it seemed that there were 2 shitas, there was Rameh and the Chachamim. The Gemara now is speaking out that really there's a third shita of Rav Shimon. And that is how the Gemara concludes. Now exactly what are the 3 shitas is not a simple point. Everyone on their own time could look at Rashi over here at the end of the narrow lines. Once we quoted the Shita of Shimon Elazar, continues the Gemara. Amar Rabba, 4 lines from the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. My taima de Rav Shimon ben Elazar, says the Gemara, you know where he gets it from. Gamar la miisha ma'isha, you say get. Just like when it comes to a woman, he learns Exir Shava, that just like when it comes to a woman, there's no such thing as a get until the get, the document of divorce, goes from a Rishos She'inai Shalai. That's not the husband's and enters the wife's Rishos. Af Evenami Achiatza get. The Rishos She'inai Shalai, so too by an Eved, the only way there's going to be a Shechor, is only going to be a freedom if the document leaves into Rishos that is not his, and therefore, since the Eved is owned by the master, putting the shtar into the hand of the Eved won't work, and rather, you have to give it to someone else. Continues the Gemara, Ba'i Rabba, as we turn over to Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Li Rav Shimon ben Elazar, according to the Shita of Rav Shimon ben Elazar that we're in the middle of delving into, Eved Kenani Mahu Sheyotzal Shliach Lekabel Gitoi Miyad Rabbi. What is the halacha of an Eved Kenani being the shliach to accept a get from the master? What's the shayla? Says the Gemara, Kivan the Gemara Lala Meisha Keisha. Since you just told me that what was the Makar Shemin Elazar Lala Keisha, therefore she have the same halacha as a woman, and just as a woman could accept the get, the Eved should be able to do the same. Or no, Isha the Ihi Mati Makabla Gita Shliach Nami Mati Meshavya. Or no, there's a fundamental difference. By a woman, she could accept the get on her own, so therefore she can be a shliach. But Eved Iuloi Makabla Gita Shliach Nami Loi Mati Meshavya, and therefore he cannot be a shliach. So ask Gemara, what is the halacha according to Rav Shimon ben Elazar? And just before we see the Teretz, just to see one Rashi that sheds a little bit of light, explains exactly what we're saying. The top Rashi says, according to Rav Shimon Elazar, reminding us that he says in Eved Einu Makabel Get Gitoi, Eved Ba'u Shas Shliach Lekabel Gitoi. And Eved can't just accept the get straight, but maybe via the mechanics of Shlichus, the Eved could. Says the Gemara again, this is a Shaila of Rabba, Basar Debaya Hadapashta. After Shaila, he himself answered it 6 lines down, Chav Gimel Beis, La Meisha Ke Isha. We learn that like a woman, and therefore, just as a woman could appoint a shliach to accept her get, so too the Eved can appoint the shliach. Excuse me, I said it that wrong. I said that the Eved's being the shliach. No, the Eved's not being the shliach. The Eved is creating a shliach. Eved Kenani is creating a shliach, and that is what the Gemara is answering, that he indeed could create a shliach. Asks the Gemara if that is true. Velhadam Rav Huna Breid Rav Yeshua. Hani koyanim. Hani koyani sucha derachmaninu. These koyanim. Gemara and Yuma that we've learned. Gemara and Adarim that quoted the Gemara and Yuma. The Kohanim are shluchim, are messengers of Rachmana, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These al gadaitach shlucha didan. If you're going to tell me the Kohanim are our shluchim, ninu, mi kamidi, is it possible? Danan lo mati avdinan, ve'enu mati avdi. How would it be possible for a Kohen to be our shliach? Again, where Kohen goes and performs the Avodah. I myself can't perform the Avodah because I'm in Yisrael. So the Kohen, if he was my shliach, how could he perform the Avodah? Rather, proves the Gemara must be that the Kohen is a shliach of whom? Of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what does this have to do with what we just said a moment ago? It says the Gemara, V'loi, what's the problem? Va'avda, but we just said just 1 second ago. And Eved, di'ihu lo mati mekabel gita. He himself can't do it, but yeah, to shliach mati meshavya, he could create a shliach. So that runs counter this din of Rav Huna Breid Rav Yeshua, that if you can't do it, you can't create a shlichus. We just said a second ago, the Eved himself can't accept the get from his master, but he could indeed appoint a shliach. Answers the Gemara, V'lohi, this is not a kasha. Why not? Because when it comes to karbanos, Yisrael loy shaychi b'teiras karbanos klal. A Yisrael has no shaychus to karbanos, but an Eved indeed is shaykh begita and is yes shaykh with a get. How do I know? Detani, we learned in the Brayso near Nadvarim Shavim Mikabel Gita Shel Chaveiroi Miad Rabbi Shel Chaveiroi Avaloi Miad Rabbi Shaloi. So we find a time, a clear source that the Brayso says that an Eved could indeed be the one that is accepting a get, and therefore we see he's b'tayras. He's within, he's under that umbrella, he has some shaykhis to gittin. And therefore it makes sense that even though he himself cannot accept a get, but he can appoint a shliach to accept a get. And it's not a kasha on the fact that just because the Kehanim could perform avodah for us, even though we, the Yisraelim, cannot perform the avodah on its own. And we continue into the last part of the Mishnah, which said that the Chachamim held that the money has to belong to someone else. Chachamim arguing on Rameir. Says the Gemara, what is this machlekes Rameir and the Chachamim? Neima b'hakamifli. Let's suggest it's the following machlekes. The Rameir savar Ein kinyan le'eved b'lei rabbi. This is really what we spoke about in Amud Aleph. Rameir holds the Eved has no kinyan without the master, and similarly, ve'ein kinyan li'isha b'lei ba'ila. And that's the reason why anything that the Eved is going to be owned by the master, so as to be kesef al yidei acherim. Because if it's not someone else's money, then it's not considered like the master is getting anything. Because anything that the Eved owns properly is already owned by the master. For Rabbanan Savri, yesh kinyan le'eved b'lei rabbi. The Rabbanan hold no, there is a kinyan to the Eved without the master. Yesh kinyan li'isha b'lei ba'ila. So suggests the Gemara that this machlekes Rameir and the Chachamim is not a localized machlekes to the world of Eved Kanani, whether he has to take money from someone else to redeem himself, but rather it's a fundamental machlekes whether every Eved has a kinyan without the master or not. Omar Rabba Omar Rav Shisha, and with this we're going to conclude. They say no, it's not true. That's not the machlekes. Everyone agrees, Ein kinyan le'eved b'lei rabbi. Everyone agrees whatever the Eved owned is owned by the master, and there's no kinyan to the Eved without the master. And similarly, ve'ein kinyan li'isha b'lei ba'ila, there's no kinyan to a woman that her husband. So what's the machlekes Rameir and the Chacham b'yaz v'acham b'mayas? Kinon ta'akni le'achar mana. Someone else gave the Eved a mana v'amar lei and said to him, al manas she'ein le'rabbcha rishus bai. I'm giving this to you and only you so that your master has no possession in it. Rameir holds Kni, when the person tells the Eved to acquire it, even though he said, I don't want your master to ever shows, but automatically, Kni Eved Kni Rabbi. The moment the Eved makes the Kni, the master acquires it. The fact that he added in this tonight, I don't want your master to own it, is meaningless. Where Kamar lay. The Tanai helps, and that's the way in the Mishnah, according to the Chachamim, the Eved could potentially have his own money. That is the way in the Mishnah why the Chachamim hold that the Eved will be able to redeem with his own money. Whereas Rameir holds, no, the only way to redeem themselves with the money of someone else, because if not, there's everything that Eved owns automatically goes to the master. We'll pick it up from Rav Elazar in the next year. Bisiyata Dishmaya.